Now let's talk about our ability to be creative, because after all, that is integral to making money. Making money is an act of incredible creativity. Where does it come from? And in different parts of this program, we deal with the nature of money and we teach you exactly what money is all about. But right now, I'm focusing on enhancing the characteristics that we have within ourselves for the purpose of making money. And to do that, I want to ask you a very simple question. Identical twins, right? Identical twins have identical DNA. That's a reality. That's why so many strange parallelisms are found among identical twins. Paths they take through life very often turn out to be the same. There are wonderful studies about twins separated at birth who are then tracked later on through life, and how they're so similar and their makeup is so based on their identical qualities that it's not surprising that similar things happen to them. So here's my question. Identical twins born, two little boys or two little girls, got to be both the same, right? That's what identical means. They look the same, and indeed they share the identical DNA. Here's my question. Do identical twins have the same fingerprints, or does each twin have his or her own fingerprints? Think about it for a moment. If you're going to say that each has their own separate fingerprints, you are going to have to explain to me, where does the genetic information come from to provide a separate set of fingerprints? Because they have the identical genetic data. See the problem? Therefore, one would naturally guess that identical twins have the same fingerprints. Why wouldn't they? The problem is that they don't. The problem is that identical twins, identical in every respect, have separate fingerprints. Astounding. Would you like to know how that happens? Well, as a matter of fact, so would almost every doctor and biology researcher in the whole world. Everybody would like to know how that happens. It's very unclear. Excepting that in ancient Jewish wisdom, there is actually some teaching on that topic. You know what it is? That we human beings are distinguished from one another by our creative ability. We were each created in the image of God. What is God's main characteristic? He is the creator. And therefore, when he creates us in his image, what we do is we become creators as well. And our ability to create is characterized by our fingers. Our fingers are, if you like, the symbols of our creativity. The fingers, our ability to move all our fingers in a way that's quite unique among all creatures on the planet. Our ability to use tools and build things, quite unique. And therefore, fingers serve as a metaphor for human creativity. And therefore, it is on our fingers that our mark of uniqueness is to be found, because we're created in the image of a unique God. Therefore, we must be unique too. In what way? Our ability to create. Each and every one of us has our own unique, extraordinary ability to create, which is rather remarkable. And the important thing to realize is that therefore fingerprints should really be thought of as soul prints. They should be thought of as more spiritual than physical. Although they are physical characteristics on our bodies, their appearance in a sense is spiritual. In other words, if we were to clone two babies, so as that two babies grow up with identical genetic characteristics, just like twins, we wouldn't expect them to have the same soul. We'd expect them to have the same body. So physically, it is possible to have identical people. Spiritually, each and every one of us is utterly and completely unique. And our uniqueness is characterized chiefly within our ability to create. Now, what is one of the most important tools that we use and that we have in order to create? The answer is our imagination. embedded deep within our hearts and in our souls is our ability to imagine things that don't exist, and to conceive of things that don't exist, and to imagine problems and solutions to those problems, solutions that don't yet exist. And if you think about it, almost every instance of somebody creating a profitable way of serving other people with goods or with services use their imagination to conceive of a solution to an existing problem. Now, when it comes to our imaginations, I would like to now provide you with a very important tip. And I'm not going to say this is easy. The temptation is overwhelming, and it's something I'm well aware of. I do not keep a television at home for this very reason. I will admit, however, that when I'm traveling and I'm on the road and I check into a hotel room, I have to exercise considerable willpower not to turn on the television. It's enormously appealing. And it's even at the end of the day when I'm getting ready to retire for the night, the temptation to, shall we say, just watch half an hour of television before falling asleep, very strong. I do try and avoid it, and I strongly recommend you do as well. Reason? Do you remember your mother, who probably went to the same mothering school as my mother? Your mother used to tell you that you must read books, not watch television. Do you remember that? Mothers all over that always said, watch television? No, read books. Reason is because when you read a book, remember I told you that information is coming in through your ears? When you read a book, your imagination gets to work imagining the circumstances the book is describing. And every time you read a book, you are exercising your imagination muscle. Every time you watch television, you are atrophying that imagination muscle. Because what television does, it's a little bit like being in zero gravity. You know that astronauts, after any extended period in space, come back with weakened bones and muscles. Reason is because they're not going through the normal daily exercise of ordinary life. Each and every one of us, every time you walk up and down stairs, you're exercising against gravity. Every time you sit down and stand up, you're exercising against gravity. Every time you pick up something and walk it across the room, you're exercising against gravity. In outer space, none of that happens. There is no gravity. Since you are not using that muscle, it begins to weaken, it begins to atrophy, your bones begin to lose calcium. It's kind of not really very healthy, is it? But the similarity to that is watching too much television. Perhaps watching any television, to be perfectly honest. What that is doing to you is it's saying, we don't need your imagination muscle. We're going to provide the whole scenario. You don't have to imagine anything at all. And don't be surprised if after a period of time of watching television, your imagination muscle begins to atrophy, begins to be weaker. And it's hard to notice at first, but after a period of time, particularly, you will notice, particularly with young people who've spent an awful lot of their youth watching television, their capacity to imagine is dramatically diminished. And it really needs to be worked on and redeveloped, because in order to create in economic terms, you absolutely need a vibrant, living, effective imagination. And that is something that we really need to be aware of. We do need to diminish the destructive effects of television, or movies for that matter. And so, seriously, part of the program for developing yourself, and that's what we're talking about. We're discussing essentially a workout program to make your body more effective at money making. Making sure that you strengthen your imagination is one of those ways. Now, I spoke a little bit earlier about another spiritual characteristic which is immensely valuable. If you were hiring somebody, you'd be looking for this characteristic. If somebody were hiring you, they'd want to know you've got this characteristic. What is it? It's the characteristic of optimism. Incredibly important. So important, in fact, that MetLife, the insurance company, did a famous study back in the 80s. Famous study, easily found information on this, where, as you know, MetLife would hire thousands of agents every year, and it was a very costly process because the dropout rate was very high. people who thought they would be able to sell insurance, and as time went by, were not good at it, became discouraged, and left. And MetLife used to always test for academic record. They used to hire people with good college degrees. They used to hire people with experience in sales. And they were persuaded by a group of researchers to try and identify applicants who possessed optimism. And they tried to design tests, and they came up with some tests which at least gave you a chance of spotting optimism. And what they said to MetLife was, divide this year's intake of new agents into half. Half of them hire according to your old criteria, whatever you used to use. Half of them forget your old criteria, forget academic degrees, forget sales experience, focus only on optimism and hire for optimism. Well, you won't be surprised to hear that the success rate and the retention rate and the rate at which the applicants and the agents prospered was 3 or 4 times higher, much higher among those who exhibited optimism than among those who had the conventional characteristics. From that day to this, MetLife and other insurance companies, surreptitiously sometimes, openly at other times, are measuring for optimism because they've recognized that in business, optimism is one of the most valuable attributes. Optimism is spiritual. So you need to work on your optimism. Now, it's very difficult because I know as well as you do that there are times you just start up in the middle, at the beginning of the day, and you're feeling down and you're just feeling gloomy and you just feel nothing's going to go right. And sure enough, when you go into situations with that mindset, guess what happens? Nothing does go right. It never works well. And so if you at that point could take a tablet, an optimism tablet, wouldn't you do it? Wouldn't you love there to be some optimism tablet so that the next phone call you made, you just sounded so optimistic and you oozed such optimism that you in fact brought about the desired result? I mean, you'd pay almost anything for an optimism tablet, wouldn't you? Well, I have the optimism tablet for you. Remember I told you everything we're talking about is spiritual. And if they're spiritual, then Scripture and ancient Jewish wisdom has the answer. That is an answer that Jews have used for centuries under all kinds of circumstances to prosper. One of the most important principles and timeless truths that Jews have employed effectively is the ability to be optimistic all the time, or almost all the time. Sometimes you can't. So what is the optimism tablet? The optimism tablet is gratitude. That's right. Expression of gratitude. The University of California in Sacramento, in Davis, actually did some important work on the role of gratitude, on the role of gratitude being the key to optimism. And so when I read that research, I thought it was unbelievable. Ancient Jewish wisdom knew this 2,000 years ago already, and now it's being understood. Finally, everybody's getting this. The key to optimism is gratitude. And something that I am going to now commend seriously to your attention is to have a private journal. You're going to be using it for a number of different purposes, but this is a journal that at the start of every day, you're going to take for yourself 10 minutes, at most, maybe 5 minutes. It's really easy to do. Get yourself somewhere private. Don't do it while you're driving, certainly not while you've got any radio or television on. Just put yourself in a quiet room, put the date down, and write down 5 things for which you are profoundly grateful. And you know what? However difficult your life is at any particular moment, I bet that if you took 5 minutes, you would come up with 5 things that you can honestly say, I am deeply grateful for those things. These 5. You cannot imagine how effective that is in shaping your entire day. And the study from the University of California at Davis I was alluding to actually identified the extent to which people's health, mood, effectiveness at work all skyrocketed if they started the day doing that which ancient Jewish wisdom has been recommending for 2,000 years. Start your day, not by thinking, but by writing down 5 things for which you are grateful. Tomorrow morning, try and think of 5 other things. And it doesn't matter if you can't, if there is some overlap. You know, if you can think of 3 new things and you have 2 things from yesterday, that's fine. But the act of thinking about them and committing them to paper is immensely powerful. When you change something from a thought into a reality by putting down the idea, everything changes. I often explain to people that a business plan that you think about in your mind will never produce investors. A business plan in your mind will never result in a brick and mortar operation. A thought you just have in your mind will never turn into an internet business. There's magic in putting ideas down on paper. And I want you to have a little notebook, totally private, that you have with you at all times. I would recommend this as, look, I love high tech. I think smartphones are wonderful. Computers are absolutely terrific. There's great software out there, really useful software out there. Evernote is a great example, and I'm sure as I'm talking, many of you who are software savvy are saying to yourselves, great, you know what, I can put it down on my Evernote, or I can put it down on my Microsoft OneNote. Please don't. I'm a big enthusiast of that kind of software. But use a pen and paper for the things we're talking about, okay? Try it. I assure you that within 30 days, you are going to see enormous difference. 30 days, your mood changes, your optimism muscle builds, and you become a much more optimistic person, which overflows effectively into everything you do. Just wait and see. I also told you something else a few minutes ago when I explained that among the characteristics you would look for if you are hiring somebody, and the characteristics that someone hiring you would look to see you had, was the ability to fluently articulate your thoughts and your ideas. Very, very important, right? Think about it. As I said, your mouth is probably your most important money-making organ in your whole body. Your brain obviously is important as well. Your mouth is vital. It's crucial because it is with your mouth that you are able to communicate an idea. It's with your mouth you can persuade somebody to your way of thinking. It's with your mouth that you can effect a sale or a transaction. Communicating effectively is very, very important. It's part of getting to know yourself. It's part of identifying the characteristics that are vital for your financial success and augmenting them. And so we need to spend a moment or two clarifying how you can increase your ability to articulate. Here it is. Again, the idea is simple. The execution takes willpower. Here is the principle. It sounds so simple. I laugh when I give this advice. This is among the most powerful advice. It's among the most powerful, permanent principles in ancient Jewish wisdom. Here it is. If you want to triple, quadruple, multiply your fluency and your ability to express yourself by 10, what you need to do is read aloud from a good book. Now, I'd recommend the good book, but it doesn't really matter. As long as it is not rubbish, as long as you're not reading out of People magazine or please choose a good book. And there really are lots of resources on the internet for advice and recommendations on good books. It's got to be something that is not too flowery and not too literary, so as that the words that are far from anything you would tend to use ordinarily in your communication. At the same time, it mustn't be below your level. It mustn't be at a childish level. There's a lot of stuff available out there. Here's what you need to do. For a minimum of 20 minutes a time, ideally 30 minutes a time, 3 times a week. So ideally for about an hour and a half a week, but not in one sitting, in 3 separate sittings, 3 20 to 30 minute sessions, read aloud. Now, if you're fortunate enough to have a spouse who enjoys being read to, and many do, by the way, you're home free. It's so much nicer to read aloud to somebody than to yourself, because you feel a little ridiculous reading aloud if there's nobody there. So reading aloud to somebody, it's great. If you happen to have children, even teenagers, you'd be astounded. If you choose the right book, you'd be astounded how eager they are to hear you reading aloud to them. And I'm not even going to talk right now about the beneficial effects this has on parent-child relationships, or on husband-wife, wife-husband relationships. That's separate. Right now, all I'm talking about is the magical transformation when your own ears hear your own lips and tongue enunciating and articulating words on a regular basis. Your vocabulary expands, your ability to use those words expand, and again, I have to tell you, somewhere between 4 to 6 weeks. Keep this up. If you keep this up for 4 to 6 weeks, you'll keep it going after that, because you will see the magical transformation. Now, people don't do this. People plonk themselves down in front of the television, and it's a total waste of time, first of all. It's time that could be used really productively in your business. And number 2, you're destroying your imagination. Take some of that time and use it to read aloud, either to yourself or to somebody else. It doesn't matter. Easier to somebody else, but read aloud. You will be astounded at what happens to your ability to communicate.